Hey folks, David Stewart here. This video is going to be a little bit of a reflection on a video that I made last year that turned out to be quite popular, actually, I guess because of these keywords. It was called, Does Today's Music Suck? Has it gotten worse over the years? Both questions, and it brought in a huge amount of traffic. But what was so interesting to me about that particular video, there was a lot of engagement with that video, but all of the engagement, all of the comments, I wouldn't say all of them, I'd say upwards of 50%, maybe 60 to 70% as I would assess them, were responding primarily to the title of the video, not to any of the content that I said. They saw the question and then they immediately had like some compulsion to answer the question. And I know that because of the answers that they gave, they wouldn't have given had they actually listened to the content. The answers that they were given were like, yeah, music started to suck in 1995. It was great until 1975. It was great until 1988. 2007 is when music started to suck. All these different years that they were given were actually confirming to me the content of the video, which was that I broke down this really common sentiment. A lot of people have the sentiment that today's music sucks, that at some point in the past music was good, and then at a certain point it stopped being good, and now it's garbage. And I sort of broke that down by looking at a bunch of hits from the 1950s, and basically explained that sentiment is really, I believe it's really the result of our own internal cognitive biases making us believe things that aren't necessarily true. And there were three biases that I really went over there, and I didn't go over them with this precise terminology, but this is what I'll call them for this. And if you know another name for them, that's great. Tell me it, because I don't have like a manual where I'm looking this up. One is bias towards the familiar. Another one is what I call recall bias, and then the third one is bias towards your own perception. So the first one, the bias towards the familiar, is that we tend to, with music, like what we like. You know, there's people who really like metal. That's a bias towards the familiar. I really like metal. I have a bias towards a lot of the idioms in metal as far as enjoying them. If you really like Soundgarden, you reach for that Soundgarden album, you put it on, and you get an expected experience. When you put on something new and you don't like it, or it doesn't meet your expectations for when you were reaching for that Soundgarden album, that involves like an element of disappointment. If you're expecting a Star Wars movie and instead you get like, just something that's not, you get a romantic comedy, you're going to be really disappointed, even if the romantic comedy is really good for what it is. So there's a lot of bias towards the familiar. We really want our expectations met, and new music often doesn't meet those, or things that are not familiar to us often don't. The other one was what I call recall bias, and recall bias is where over time we filter out a bunch of different stuff that doesn't mean anything to us. So with music, there's all this music that's filling our ears all the time, and what we tend to remember is the stuff that had some sort of impact on us, and usually it's going to be a positive impact. So it's like, man, the 70s was full of good music, man. We had like Led Zeppelin and Montrose, and you had Van Halen at the end, and we had Rainbow, and they had ELO and all these bands, and it's like these bands weren't writing any number one hits in the 70s. They were writing very few of them. So what you remember is that these bands you listened to in the past were good, but you forget about the other stuff that might have been on the radio at the same time because you didn't like it. And over time, like, your memory is always going through and filtering and just throwing away stuff that doesn't matter. So if something is mediocre or just doesn't really have an impact, you're probably going to forget it. And that's an important piece of bias that I think a lot of people fall victim to, is that they assume that their recollection is accurate, or that they assume that their recollection is an accurate representation of history. And that couldn't be further from the truth in most cases. We have a strong set of biases that are necessary for our memory to be functional. We need to pull up the things which are relevant to us, not the things which are irrelevant. But by discarding the things which are irrelevant, we don't have an accurate view of history. And that third bias, which is really just another type. I mean, all of these could be really thought of as sort of anchoring biases, which is focusing too much on like one set of information, usually the first piece of information. The other one is I would call it like a focus bias, which is you're only aware of the popular music right now sucking. The stuff that is like right in your face, the number one hit stuff, the Adele, the Drake, I don't know who's popular. And you're unaware of all the other things that are going on. So there's a huge amount of music that's going on that's not that stuff, that is sort of being played everywhere. that's actually really popular, and in some cases, a total genre like metal might be more popular than a genre like pop, depending on the way that you look at it, because the people who buy metal buy more music per capita. It ends up being like a more still a very popular genre. So you're still missing out on a lot of music that's really, really good. And so like 2016 had some records that I thought were amazing, but obviously they weren't pop records because I don't really like pop music. It's not something that that I really dig. But I'm not going to come here and say like, well, pop music sucks and has gotten worse because I don't like the way it currently sounds. Like, no, it's probably a lot of my biases towards the things that I like, my familiar things, rather than the things that I don't like. But I did break down that I do think music has gotten significantly simpler over time. It started off really simple. Pop music's never been very complex, but it's gotten a little bit simpler over the last 5 or 10 years, and we've also had, with the use of electronics, a big thinning of texture and kind of a loss of talent, and that's where I think that there's been a little bit of a decline. But that's only the decline of like the most popular, in-your-face, made for the lowest common denominator music. All the other stuff, there's still great music out there. So no, today's music doesn't really suck. It's mostly our bias. But like I said, all those comments were just telling me what year music started to suck. And every comment, it's a different year, which would explain that basically everyone had the same set of biases and was just throwing them on the page because they wanted to respond to that question of, does today's music suck? And if I were to maybe make another like hypothesis, is that if I were to go through and say, like, music started to suck this year, well, how old were you in that year? My guess is they would still be pretty young whenever that year was. It would be like they'd be like 22 or something, or maybe even less. And then after that, music starts to suck, regardless. Like, oh, I was born in the 50s and music started to suck it after 1975. Well, okay, you were 22 years old, so that's when music started to sound bad. So that's what I think most of that stuff was, and those are the biases that were involved. So anyway, you can watch that original video and take a look at the comments, and you'll see that a lot of the comments are just sort of justifying what I said. But what I find really interesting is that people would click on that long tail keyword title and not even care about the content. They would just care more about just answering the question in the comments field. It was a really bizarre, and I'm not sure what to do with that like little piece of information. Also, just as one last little addendum, I've been getting a lot of traffic on older videos that have some of these long tail keywords. I don't know what YouTube's doing with its algorithm, but I'm getting a lot of traffic from older videos for some reason. Just so y'all know what's going on. A lot of my older, less understood videos. Another one that has that is like, are feminists ruining the movies, which I'll probably do a follow-up on at some point too. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.